Everybody has a story, and every story needs to be heard. On this podcast, we are talking with each member of the General Conference Leadership Council. I'm your host, Alyssa Truman, and this is ANN Profiles. Today, I'm here with Busi Khumalo, who is the Director of Adventist Youth Ministries. Busi, thank you for taking the time to meet with us here today. I've been looking forward to this one.
Okay.
You came to the General Conference right after GC. Well, you were voted in at the latest GC session.
Correct.
But you didn't arrive here until when?
We didn't arrive here with my wife until January 2023.
Yeah.
So to be precise, we started work here January 16, 2023.
Yeah. So you're probably one of the shortest time period person that I have had on this podcast now. So I'm excited to have you. You work in maybe one of my favorite ministries. I always had a passion for youth and young adults. So I'm excited to talk with you and get to know a little bit about the man who is now serving in this role. So I like to always start off at the very beginning. So tell us a little bit about where you were born and who are your parents?
Okay. Thanks a lot, Alisa, for having me. I appreciate this. I was born in Pretoria, South Africa. And my parents, their names were Daniel Khumalo and Teresa Khumalo. My father died in 1990, so my mother is still alive. So yeah, basically that's who I am in a nutshell.
So how were you, since I don't know how old you are, and I'm not going to ask you your age, you were able to have a number of years with your father before he died.
Yes, I spent quite a considerable time with my father. Although there's never the right time for your father or mother to die, it was untimely. I was in high school at the time, but I did spend quality time with my father, and I felt that he was a present father.
Excellent.
And I did miss that moment, and I still do.
So your early childhood years, were you raised an Adventist?
Yes.
In an Adventist home?
Yes, I was raised in an Adventist home. I'm a second generation Adventist from my father's side, and a third generation Adventist from my mother's side.
Okay. Do you know how your parents came to know about the church?
Yes, my father came to know about Adventism through a campaign that was conducted in Pretoria at the time, because he was a Baptist, a very staunch Baptist. My mother was already an Adventist, as I said.
So when you're born into an Adventist home.
Correct, yeah.
In those early years of your childhood, do you have any memories that stand out? Do you remember any interactions at your church, or what are some special childhood memories that you have?
My mother and my father, as I said, were ardent, faithful members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and now I have two other siblings, my two sisters. I'm in the middle.
Oh, I'm a middle child of 3 too.
Is it?
See, now I know why I like you even more.
So, and I'm the only boy, And so my parents used to make sure that when we have our morning and evening worships, they would, require us to memorize Bible texts. And I wasn't fond of that, particularly. And my mother would, make sure that I memorize my verses. And, funny, I did not like it at the time, but later on, those very texts that I did not like, that I had to memorize, later on became like my compass. Whenever I recalled those texts, I would remember the things that my parents instilled in me. So those are fond memories that I have of my upbringing. And of course, in church also, I was a member of the MV, Missionary Volunteer, before the name was changed to Adventist Youth Ministries. And we were raised by God-fearing people, leaders of the church who loved us, who groomed us, and I'm what I am because of the church. So those are fond memories I have of how, I was raised by my parents and those who were leaders of the church at the time.
Now, one thing that I'm kind of like learning is
Mm-hmm.
that just because we have an Adventist education system, it doesn't mean that people always have it locally. Were you
Correct.
able to go through an Adventist education system or?
Yes.
Okay, so all the way from childhood on up?
No, from secondary.
Okay.
Yeah. Elementary school, I did it in Pretoria in a public school. But from secondary schooling all the way up to university, I went to different Adventist schools.
Yeah. So when you went to primary school,
Mm-hmm.
were there any challenges that you faced being an Adventist? Things that you saw that were different? Any nuances
Sure.
that being an Adventist brought up for you?
Yeah, yes, there were differences. When you are raised as an Adventist, there are certain things and principles and teachings that your parents instill in you, which the ordinary child does not get to be exposed to. And the language, of course, there was a lot of swearing, foul language, and all that. And I used to wonder why. But then I later on appreciated the fact that it's because their parents probably did not know anything better, and that's what they then transferred and transmitted to them. So there were differences, but I had good friends, in primary, and some of them later on I conducted Bible studies with, so it was good, but at the same time it was a culture shock to discover that yes, there are differences.
Were there any challenges that you had at, like, with events being held on Sabbaths or those kind of things? Like, I know I've talked to some people where their tests were on Sabbaths and sports were. Did you ever run into any of those issues, or
There were
not
times
really for you?
Well, there were times when our schools, when I was in elementary or primary school, that there was a requirement for kids to go to sports on Sabbath, to attend to sporting activities on Sabbath, or attend classes on Sabbath. But I mean, this was primary school, so it was not so much enforced and it was not so much strict. But yes, but my father used to go to school and explain to the principal and the teachers that my child will not attend any activities on Sabbath. So I never had to deal with that myself,
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you go to secondary school. Where do you go to secondary school at?
I went to a school far from home. I had to travel about 3 days. Back then, we used the train to travel. So we didn't fly. And so I traveled 3 days to that school. It was an Adventist school. It's still there. The name is quite tricky. Kancele.
Oh, say that again.
Kancele.
Oh, that's fun. I'm
Yeah.
not going to try it, though.
Yeah, you'll mutilate your tongue.
I will, and I will be embarrassed.
Yeah, it was Kancele Secondary School, and it was a good school. But back then, I must be honest with you, Alisa, I felt like it was Siberia. I was banished to the island of Patmos because it was far from home, and the weather was fierce, severe in winter. And back then,
Is this still in South Africa?
in South Africa, but in another province, more than 1,200 kilometers in miles. I don't know how far that would be. But,
I'm not gonna try
yeah,
that.
it was far from home, and I would only go home once a year.
Oh,
Because the mode of transport, as I said, it was by train, and it was not cheap. So when the parents sent us to school, they said, "We'll only see you at the end of the year." And back then, there were no cell phones. And whenever
how old were you?
I was probably 12.
Oh, wow.
I was 12, 11, somewhere there.
I have a hard time with my college-age child being gone, and I'm trying to figure out how to get her home
Sure.
more. I can't imagine. Wow.
Yeah, it was a challenge. But you know what? Those days, it was important for us to go to that school because my parents insisted that you need to get Adventist education. And so we went there. It was a couple of us from Pretoria traveling far away from home.
So you had some friends that went with
Yes,
you.
yes,
That
yes.
helps a little bit.
That did. And I got baptized there.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
that's great. So tell me, how did this lead to baptism?
Well,
What about it?
there was a week of prayer. And one pastor, a guest pastor, came to preach to us. And somehow I just got moved to respond to the call for baptism, and I was baptized. I think it was around 1982, 1983, somewhere there when I was baptized. It was an awesome experience.
So you go to an Adventist school. How many years is it? 3 years, 4 years that you're there?
I was there about 2 to 3 years, and then I moved to another Adventist school to do high school now. Because that was a secondary school. So I did high school in another school, not far from that one, but still far from home.
Well, you're like, it's still far away from home, though.
Yeah.
So what is the name of the
second one?
Yes.
Bethel College. It was called Bethel College.
Okay. So, I think I even know, like, South Africa's at the bottom of Africa. So I know it's going to be cold there, but in my mind, it's hot.
No, it's
but
cold.
It's not hot
compared
where you are.
to the rest of Africa. South Africa is cold.
Yeah, well, that would make sense since it's at the bottom.
It's at the bottom, yeah.
All right, so you go to Bethel College. This is your high school years.
High school years.
So I have to ask, I know you were raised in a very committed home, gone through Adventist education. Did you ever struggle during your high school years with your faith, with the struggles we hear a lot about with our young people today? Did you ever go through those battles in your own mind?
Yes, I did struggle. I must be honest with you. As Adventist young people growing up, we are not immune to the challenges that other young people are facing. Friends, can influence you and can tell you, no, man, don't adhere to what your parents told you. They give you alternatives. But thank God, as I said to you earlier on, the texts that I used to memorize that I never liked, God really brought them back to my memory, and they are the ones that used to remind me that, remember, you were taught. I remember this particular memory verse I used to memorize, Psalm 1, blessed is the one who does not walk in the counsel of the ungodly, and all that. That text was my guide, and it kept on reverberating in my mind as I was studying at Bethel College, because we had non-Adventist students at Bethel College. And some of them were drinking. Some of them, did things that were not in line with the principles of the Bible and Christianity. Yes, there were those instances. But, as I say, what my parents taught me kept me going.
I remember all those. I remember also memorizing a lot of Bible verses. And it's interesting because I had the very same experience where there was pivotal moments in my life where it's like this Bible verse just kind of comes to me. Correct. And it's like at the right time,
you needed
the right moment, it gives me that hope to know that, okay, I'm not alone. God is with me in this moment. And I feel like we've kind of moved away from the memorizing of scripture, especially with our young people. Like I remember we used to put little stars on like things in Sabbath school, and it was a very important part of our Pathfinder experience when I was growing up. And it seems like there's been a little bit of a shift away from that hiding God's word in our hearts. And I appreciate you sharing how important that was to you. And I hope it encourages others that persevere with it. Even if our kids don't like it, it's someday, just like you and I, we'll be very blessed because we did have that in our hearts.
And sorry to interrupt, Alisa, but it's because of that even when I was serving as youth director at the union, at the division, I used to say to my colleagues who are, youth directors, I used to say to them, we have so many handbooks in youth ministries, but let's remind our young people and let's make them aware of the fact that there is still this number one textbook, the Bible.
Amen.
And they need to know their Bibles. Before they know the Pathfinder administrative manual, before they know what the progressive classes, are all about, they need to know their Bibles. And I still believe in that, even here, as I serve as the director of the General Conference.
That makes me even happier to know you're the youth director of the General Conference, because I love it. We need to point people back to the Word of God.
Correct.
So after, you're kind of wrapping up your high school years, that means college is coming.
Yeah.
Do you know what you want to do?
Yes, I knew.
What did you want to do?
From childhood, I knew. I knew from childhood that I have to be a pastor later on in life.
Really?
Yes.
You always knew?
I always knew.
When do you think you first felt that?
I don't remember the age, but I know that from the time I was small, when people ask me, what would you like to be in life? What would be your career path? I would tell them, I want to be a pastor. I never knew what that meant.
You're like, but I'm going to be a pastor.
But I knew I wanted to be a pastor. And I have a story to tell related to that.
I want to hear it.
If you want to hear it.
I want to hear it.
Now, my mom tells me, but she only told me the story later on when I was at the point of, not knowing what I should do. There are times in your life you reach the crossroads and you are confused. That's the only time.
I do know those times.
Yeah, that's the only time my mother sat me down and said, Busi, you remember when you were growing up, you told us as your parents that you want to be a pastor, so stick to that. And then she told me her story. She told me that story only after finishing high school. She said to me, when I was pregnant with you, because the firstborn is my sister. So when she was pregnant with me, she says she made a pledge to God that if it is a boy, she would like this child to serve the Lord, to be a pastor. Now, she never told me that when I was a boy. She never told me that. Yet God, in his own way, planted that in my heart already.
Wow.
And so later on, when I finished high school and I was now contemplating doing medicine, she sat me down. She said, no, I made a mistake. I never told you this, but I have to tell you the story now. She says, when you said you wanted to be a pastor, I said, this is, God speaking to you, because I didn't tell you what I had prayed to God, for. And she says, don't change your mind. Stick to that. Be a pastor. And that made a big difference in my life. And I never hesitated. I went to seminary and I did theology.
So where did you go to college?
Same school, Bethel.
All right. So Bethel is high school and
college.
College. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your college years.
I did 2 years of theological training at Bethel College. And unfortunately, it closed down because of other challenges that the school had at the time. So we were given an option to go to Solusi University in Zimbabwe, our Adventist seminary, or go to Helderberg College in Cape Town, another Adventist seminary. Now, since Helderberg College was in South Africa, I don't need a study visa or a passport or anything. I chose to go to Helderberg. So that's where I finished off my bachelor's degree in theology. So I did my 3rd and 4th year in Somerset West, Cape Town, at Helderberg College. At the time, Helderberg College was under Andrews University, so my degree comes from Andrews University.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So you start off at Bethel, you go to Helderberg. Tell me a little bit more about your college years. Mm-hmm. So you're studying theology. Do you work during the summers? I know some people call porter in summers. Some people are working at different things. What is your experiences during this time?
I was fortunate when I went to Bethel College and then to Helderberg College later on. My mother was a colporter, and so she was a credentialed literature evangelist, which means she was helped by the church to educate us. So we were able to go to school and go to expensive Adventist schools because the church was really putting a lot of money into our education. So I didn't have to really work for my fees and stuff like that. But during vacation time, then I would join her as a colporter, and I did colporter ministry during that time, during vacation.
Colporter ministry it's a special work. It teaches you to trust in God a lot.
Definitely.
Do you have any stories?
Yes, I do. Many.
I would love to hear some of them, because those are often very formative in even us understanding our own faith and in trusting God. Mm-hmm. So tell me one of your favorite stories from your time colportering.
Yes. By the way, I did colporter ministry for 1 year before I did my theological training at Bethel. So after high school at Bethel, I took a gap year, did colporter ministry, and then went back to college, Bethel and Helderberg, and then I would continue with my literature evangelism during vacation time. So one interesting story that I can share with you and the audience is that one time, and the viewers, I took my breakfast at home, and I prepared myself for this canvassing experience which I was going to have, and I took my briefcase and then I left home. And before leaving, my mother prayed with me. And this was going to be the first time that I would have to go without her, because all along I would go with her. She would accompany me and she would be the one starting the conversation with the people to sell books and stuff like that. But this time I was going to be alone. It was my maiden literature evangelism work. And so I went into this house and I found this old lady. And I sat down with her and I could tell that this lady is poor. As I was entering the house, I began to wonder, what am I expecting? To sell a book to a poor person? How will she afford the books that I'm carrying? I don't think she will afford, but I still felt impressed to get in there and speak to her. So I sat down, I prayed with her, and I started showing her the books that I had. The one book which I showed her and she had interest in, the name of the book was God's Answers to Men's Questions. Mm-hmm. Powerful book at the time. I don't know whether they are still producing it. God's Answers to Men's Questions.
Is it the one where it's kind of like different? It's kind of goes through our beliefs a little bit. Yes,
Correct.
I actually sold it myself. So
correct. You did?
Yes, I was a colporteur for 7 years.
Oh
so.
Yeah, nice. A powerful book.
Yes.
So I showed her that book. I showed her medical books. I showed her other books. But her interest was in that book, God's Answers to Men's Questions. And then I said to her, then she asked, how much is it? So I told her. And she said, okay, I don't have the money now, but I want that book. Now remember, I was not working. I got impressed, Alisa, that I should help her to buy that book. So I contributed from my own pocket. I gave her the deposit to purchase that book, and I left the book with her, with the understanding that later on I would come back and collect the balance. So I gave her the money. I showed her the money. I said, this is the money that I'm contributing for you to buy the book. And she was very much appreciative of that. And so I left the book with her, took her name and the address so that at the end of the month I could come back and collect the balance. At the end of the month I came back. When I came back, I met a lady I had not met before in the same house. It was a younger lady. So she said to me, who are you? So I explained. I said, I came here a month before and I met this lady and I told her what happened. And she says, okay, you are the one who sold a book to my mother. I said, yes. I said, where is she? She said, she died.
Oh, wow.
She said, she died. I said, she died? She said, yes. My heart was sore because we had that connection with that lady. But I must also confess that I was concerned about the money, the balance of the money, because I also contributed. So I thought at least the balance will help, because I was a student and all that. But more than the money, I was concerned and I wondered whether she had the time to read the book. So I asked the lady, can you recall if your mother, read the book? Where is the book? She said, I don't know where it is, because she used to read that book with her friends. Ladies from around here, from the neighborhood, would come and sit in the house with her, and they would read the book. And as she was explaining what happened, I felt tears coming down my cheeks, because I realized that the seed of the gospel was planted in the heart of that lady and the ladies that were there. And I said to the lady, thank you so much, you have made my day. And I never bothered her about the balance of the money that I needed to collect, because I knew that the gospel seed was planted. And so I have other experiences, but that one stands out because of that connection I had with that lady and the effect that it had, the book had in the life of that lady.
I love that story because you were able to kind of see those results. Sometimes when you canvas, you don't actually go back, so you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I hear a lot like colporteuring, selling books door to door. That's not a thing for today. Like, people don't need it today. And actually today people are fighting loneliness. Sure. And they still have just as many questions as they did when you were selling books and when I was selling books. And actually loneliness might even be more a problem now.
True.
And just having sometimes people come to the door and sit. I remember so many times where it would be often older people. Like, I would just sit with them.
Yeah.
And I would talk with them. And sometimes, people feel like I was using up time but that was like being Christ for them.
True.
We were actually just being present.
Yeah.
And sometimes it became less about the books and more about being like Jesus.
True.
And I think that the call porter work is just as important today as it was yesterday when it was started.
I still believe in that.
Anyway, so I love hearing people's stories because it kind of reminds me of those special times as well. So, and it was neat to know that your mom was actually, did you say licensed or credentialed? I've never heard of that. So that's a new one for me. Yeah. What did your dad do?
My father was a carpenter.
Okay.
And he taught me carpentry. So I used to be with him also. So I kind of, learned to be a colporter through my mother. And also I learned the carpentry trade from my father. So I was like, my father was Joseph. I was Jesus in a way.
I will not tell people you just called yourself Jesus. No, you said in a way, so we're good.
I don't want to be blasphemous, but it made me feel proud that I was doing what Jesus did when he was raised by Joseph. You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying. I'm just teasing you there. No, I think that's it actually is kind of intriguing too, because Mary was the one who was teaching Jesus from the scrolls and like all that kind of stuff. So a lot of actually your story does actually have a lot of symbology that like totally connects there. All right, so you go to Heidelberg College and you pursue your degree in theology.
Yes.
Do you have any teachers that stood out or classes that you just totally loved?
Yes, I loved my teachers. There is this one teacher in particular, Pastor Jep, Johann Jep. He's now retired. He wasn't well. I was told by someone he wasn't well, and I hope he's okay now. He was a wonderful teacher. He used to teach us a lot of stuff. He taught us New Testament. He was a good scholar. But what I liked about him is that he made sure that we were grounded in the Bible, and he would tell us what we should be careful of when we go out there and become pastors. And I had wonderful friends, colleagues, and peers. Yeah, there were challenges, but through it all, God was with us, and we were able to finish our studies.
Were there any beautiful women there?
Well,
I'm just wondering where she comes into this story.
Yes, there were beautiful women, and by the way, that's where I met her. We knew each other as friends in Pretoria, but then she joined me at Heidelberg because I'm the one who went ahead and studied at Heidelberg. And when she heard that I was at Heidelberg, she also wanted to go to Heidelberg. So she did communication and a minor in psychology, and I was doing my theology. So that's where we started our relationship.
And what is her name?
Evodia.
Evodia.
Yeah.
She is a fantastic woman. I love her.
She is.
So, all right, so you start dating there as well?
Yes, we started dating there. Yeah.
I want more to the story here.
Yeah, it was quite an interesting experience because I've had, I was in a relationship with other people before, but our relationship was different because I felt there was that connection. She was a friend. I knew her before we dated. We were friends for 5 years before we started dating. So I knew that I was making the right decision. I wasn't making a mistake. And God really led me in the right direction. And so she was wonderful. Even people around us at college would appreciate our relationship. And we were told that we are a model couple and stuff like that. And so, but she's a very nice person. And I knew that she would be a good support for my, my work when I become a pastor later on, because I think that's important. That the partner you get should be able to help you in your ministry. And the personality and who she was, I could tell that she was going to be a person who will help me in my ministry.
So you graduate college and you start ministry. Where do you start?
Then I went back to Pretoria, where I was born, and that's where I started my ministry. So it's interesting that when I started my ministry, those who knew me from the time I was small did not think that I was going to make a good pastor, because they started thinking, he's still so young. We wonder whether he'll make a good pastor. But, God in his wisdom knew what he was doing. I had wonderful lay people. My elders in the churches were very wonderful. They helped me. They mentored me. And I was willing to listen to them, even though they were not educated. I was willing to listen to what they were doing because they had the practical experience. I had the theory, I had the knowledge from the books, but they knew how to do things practically. And so that helped me to become a pastor that, who was able to reach the people where they were because of the mentoring I got from my elders.
What were some of the greatest challenges you faced in those early years of pastoral ministry?
Trying to contextualize the training I got at the seminary to make it easy for me to reach the people where they are. Because very often we have the academic training, but we don't have the practical knowledge and experience. And we come as new, energetic, zealous young pastors. We want to prove sometimes that we know the Greek, the Hebrew.
And we don't care about knowing the Greek and the Hebrew.
People don't care about that. So the challenge was to translate all the knowledge into something that the ordinary person in the church can appreciate. Because people want salvation. People want to know that Jesus loves them. People want to know that God takes them and accepts them as they are. And that's the challenge, the theory part, the academic knowledge I had, and the practical aspect of ministry. I had to make sure that I get into that. And God, through lay people and other, and of course my parents were there. My mother was there. My father by that time had died. But my mother and my sisters and other people, family members, were there as a support system to help me.
Let's talk a little bit about your father's death. How did that impact you? Because you were in, did you say college?
I was at Bethel College. I was still in high school, towards the end of my high school years. Yeah.
As somebody, because you're far away, because Bethel College, as you said, was very far away.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like you could just jump on an airplane and be there.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about how that impacted you as a young man.
It was not easy. I felt that he died at the time I needed him the most. So what happened is I got a message. There were no cell phones back then. So the school business manager came to me and said, Busi, we've just heard that your father is not well. But the school is arranging something for you so that you can go home and meet him and see him. So when he said that, I realized that he is pretty much serious. So when I left home in January, he was okay. I did not get the sense that he was not well. And that was in late May when the school business manager told me that my father is not well and they need to, get me a ticket to go back home. So I was puzzled. I was still trying to understand what happened between January and now. And so they eventually bought a ticket for me to fly. So I flew. In the plane, as I was going home, my mind was just wondering what to expect, because I was told by my mother through a letter that my father had cancer of the liver. And so that was a scary moment for me because I knew cancer is not curable. But then I never knew that. And my father never showed signs of him having cancer before I left home in January. So I was scared and I did not know what to expect. So eventually I arrived, and when I got to the hospital, I realized he's really, really in a bad shape. The stomach had already bulged and he was not eating, he lost weight. So it was a very sad experience for me. But God prepares us for things because in the plane as I was flying home, I met a stranger who was sitting by my side. And he said to me, "Why are you going home? Because you're supposed to be at school at this time." So I explained to him what was happening. And he prayed with me, a total stranger. And he shared with me words of hope and courage. And when I landed, there were family members to pick me up. And then I went to the hospital and I met him. And I was devastated because he was not well. But he could still talk. He could still recognize me. And we had good times together. So, yeah. And a few days after my arrival, he died. But before he died, I remember my last visit to the hospital, he wanted to talk to me. And so he held me by the hand and he said, "You need to grow up and be a man," So those words are still, I still remember those words very well. And the following day, when we went to the hospital, we heard that he passed away at night. So it was a very sad moment. So I had that bond with my father. As I said, he was a carpenter, and I learned a lot of things from him. He was a devoted Adventist, dedicated. He was an elder of the church for many years. He had conducted Bible studies with many people, and some of the people that were Adventists came to the church because of him. So he had a profound impact, in my own life.
It's hard to lose a parent. It's even harder when it's early.
True.
I mean, I don't think it's ever easy to lose someone that we love.
No.
Grief will always be there, but it feels very senseless.
Mm-hmm.
Cancer is it's
a cruel disease.
It's cruel, and it takes people really young.
Sure.
And as you said, you were in these moments where you still needed, that father figure.
Mm-hmm.
So you were saying earlier that you went back to Detroit. Was it your own home church that you were pastoring, or was it another church nearby?
Another church. Other churches nearby. Okay. But the district was the same. But I wasn't pastoring my home church, but it was other churches in Pretoria.
How many churches?
Well, it was, I was an intern, new from school, and I had to swim or sink. I had a supervisor or mentor who was far from me, who was supposed to help me to adjust well into ministry, but I had to discover things by myself because he was physically far from me. And so I had to pastor about 7 or 8 churches as an intern.
No, all right. Let's talk about this
and companies, by the way. I'm not counting the companies, but 7 churches.
Okay, we're gonna explore this a little bit more here. So, because I'm from America, I've grown up here.
You don't know what that means.
I don't. So normally somebody graduates and you get a pastorate. So you maybe get 2 or 3 churches, maybe a single church district, whatever. But what's the difference between being an intern and a pastor?
As an intern, you have to be supervised by someone who's experienced. And according to policy, when a graduate starts work as a pastor, they cannot do it without, So
there's some oversight to just make sure you know what you're doing.
Yes. So according to policy, someone must be there to supervise you, guide you for at least 2 years, so that you learn the ropes, how ministry, is done and all that. But I had a good senior pastor who was supposed to help me, and whenever we met, he was very helpful.
Very supportive. Just very supportive. The distance
it's just the distance. I mean, it was far.
So you have 7 churches.
Yeah, organized churches.
How many companies do you know?
I think I had about 5, if I remember well, 5
so you have 12 churches and companies.
Correct.
How do you even pastor that many?
I don't know.
You're like, I'm still figuring it out.
But that's where the help from the elders came in handy, because I used to consult with them. I used to ask them questions. I never said to myself, I'm educated. They're not educated. I asked them questions, and I told them, I was honest with them. I cannot conduct a funeral. I remember my first experience where I had to now bury someone. I did not know how to do it, and the elder of the church guided me through the process, and I learned how to do it through his aid, his help, and conducting communion service and other services. You know what I'm saying? So I had to be helped by the elders, and fortunately, I had good elders who knew the Bible, the spirit of prophecy, their church manual, the policy of the church, and so that helped me a lot.
What I actually love about what you just said was actually twofold. One, you were humble enough to realize you don't know things.
Sure.
And you weren't going to put on a pretense to make it seem like it. That you were humble enough to say to these elders, to these leaders, I need your help. Mm-hmm. I may have all the theological training, but I don't know how to bury someone. Yeah. I don't know how to start this communion service. Mm-hmm. And that actually says a lot about you and your character. Mm-hmm. But what I also love about this was that you had elders that when a humble young pastor came, they came alongside you.
They did.
And they mentored you to be the pastor you become.
Sure.
Because they could be like, well, what is he doing here?
Yeah.
But instead, they saw it as their chance to be able to support you and help you.
True.
I'm still wrapping my brain around the 12 churches and companies here.
My itinerary was crazy.
I'm wondering, like, obviously you really have to lean into your elders.
Correct.
Into this, because you can't obviously preach every Sabbath.
No.
And you're obviously not visiting every single member
And
because there's no way.
And
you don't have a car.
I didn't have a car. I didn't have a wife at the time. And so what I used to do is that I drew my itinerary with the help of the supervisor, who was not always with me, but he helped me at the beginning of the year. He helped me to draw an itinerary so that I could be able to manage the churches, to visit them. So what I did is that if I went to church A, I would make sure that I target church B, which is not so far from church A. Sometimes church B was too far. So I would cluster the churches together geographically so that when I visit church A, at least I can also visit other churches around church A. So my itinerary would be structured in a way that I would spend a week in that area.
So sorry, I'm very intrigued by this. And it's part of your life story, so it works, right?
Sure.
But like, if you're gone for a week, like, where's your home?
My home would be somewhere, wherever I am.
Wherever you are.
Yeah. I used to stay, by the way, the church where I was staying, the church didn't have a church property, a church house. So I used to stay with a family, a wonderful family. I used to spend time with the gentleman who was a very kind elder of the church, and his wife. They were childless, but they were wonderful people. And so that was my home base. But whenever I traveled to the different churches, then wherever I was, that was my home. And so I would do preaching to all the churches around there. So pretty much every week I had a week of prayer, because I would make sure that all the churches are visited. I would preach, do church boards, do business meetings, do everything that I could possibly do while I'm there. Because once I leave that group of churches, I'm going to another group of churches. I don't want those to feel that, I shortchanged them. There are things that I did not do while I was there. So that's how I did it, and moved to another cluster of churches, then another cluster of churches. Then once I had finished all the churches, then I would start again.
This also teaches something that I think is really valuable, that maybe is sometimes lost on those of us who come from a single pastor district.
Mm-hmm.
It actually teaches us as lay people to have to step up. Because if your pastor is only going to be there maybe once every couple months or something, hypothetically, the lay people step up. The elders do the jobs that elders have been called to do. Yeah. And it becomes much more of a church family operating rather than a pastor disseminating. Yeah. And I'm not saying that's how all of the churches do it, but I noticed it was interesting when I was younger. I came from a conference where sometimes when a pastor would move on, sometimes they wouldn't replace him super quickly because it would kind of help stretch the dollars.
Yeah.
And sometimes those were actually the periods of the most growth for our church, was when we didn't have a pastor, because the church people really had to step up and help.
Yeah.
The best pastors I've ever met are the ones who really empower and train their members to do the work that we are actually called to do.
True.
The pastor is not supposed to do
everything.
The job of evangelism and personal ministries and visitation and everything on their own. That really is, it's a community. It's a family.
True.
So when do you get married?
We got married in 1994.
Okay. So are you still at the same church district at this point?
Yes, I was still there, but I was still at that first district after my training. So I got married in 1994, started work in 1993, got married in 1994, August 1994.
Okay.
Yes.
So she just starts moving around with you from location to location?
Yes. When we got married, then she had to do that. But sometimes she couldn't because of limitations. I earned very little, and There was no spouse travel.
No spousal travel benefits.
No. So no car.
How are you doing this without a car?
Yeah.
This is just like, wow.
Yeah.
I'm impressed. Actually, the more I talk to you, the more I'm just like, wow, this man, yes.
The Lord provided. I got a car that year when we got married. Or just before we got married. Sorry, I got a car just before we got married. But 1993, when I started in January, until the end of the year, I did not have a car. Got into 1994. Then I got a car sometime early 1994. The conference gave me a loan to buy a car.
So where do you go from this district?
From there, then I got a transfer to another district, which was not so far from that first district. And at the time, my wife, we moved physically to stay in another place. And she then became pregnant with our first child. So when we moved to the other district, she was now pregnant with our first child.
How many churches and companies do you have in this district?
We still had a number of churches.
Okay. I was like, I'm going to ask.
Yeah. I don't remember how many now, but...
it was a lot.
It was a lot. At least I was a bit more experienced now, But of course, it was a different district, new challenges, new people. I was still learning how to work with the new people. I was wondering whether I would get the same support I got in the previous district, which I did get.
That's a blessing.
Yeah.
All right. So you serve in this new district, and then where do we go from here?
Yeah. So we were in that district for only 1 year, unfortunately. Because what happened is, now ministry has its own challenges, Alisa. Back then, I don't want to share many challenges because there were many more blessings. But we had challenges in the ministry like any other pastoral couple. And some experiences made us discouraged. We had this child who was born in that year, and financially we were not making it. And it was not easy. We knew that I joined the ministry not because we wanted money, but because we wanted to serve the Lord. But money is needed. But money was not the only consideration. There were other challenges that we were experiencing at the time in that particular conference and district. So God, in his wisdom, because he knows our needs, he knows our prayers, the Bible says, I will answer even before they pray. And God did exactly that, because one time while I was laying in bed, discouraged, a call came. And the conference president told me that he had received a call for me to join another conference in South Africa. It is not common. Then it was not common. Let me put it that way. It was not common for a person to receive a call from another conference.
Okay.
Usually, you would be employed in this particular conference from your first year until you retire. Normally, that's how things happened. It was very much uncommon. It used to happen, but not much. So I got a call from another conference, and my president was telling me that he received a call from the president of that conference to say that they need me to come and join them. And so I spoke to my wife, and she was willing for us to go, and we prayed about it, and we left. So we left that conference and went to another conference. But God knew why, because my ministry was redefined when we moved to another conference. In a positive way.
So how does it get redefined?
It was redefined in the sense that I when I went to the other conference, the way they did things, administration was there to support me as a young pastor. The administration was there to listen to us. The churches, the environment was just conducive. I learned a lot in the other conference, and I'm thankful for the conference where I started my ministry. Please don't get me wrong, and there were many good people in the conference where I started. But I think God knew that it was time for me to gain another experience. So that's why I say it was redefined, because my calling to ministry was solidified in the conference where I served after that one.
So when does youth become a focus?
Mm-hmm.
Because right now you're a pastor in churches, multiple churches. But when does youth and young adults become this new direction for you?
At the time, I never knew what God wanted me to do in ministry. I knew that I was going to be a pastor. And as you know, in the local church, it's a mixed bag. You have the old and the young. All the generations are there. And in my ministry in general, I had always tried to minister to all the groups, to all the generations, to make sure that I meet the needs of all the generations. But I must be honest with you, at the time when I was in the ministry, I never thought that one day God would want me to become a youth director. In fact, I must confess, I once told my wife, I said, I don't think I'm cut out for this thing. When I observed how other youth directors used to operate and the challenges they met, I told my wife, I said, I don't think I'll ever become a youth director. And God was listening to me. And later on, I became a youth director. So I was called to be a youth director at the union. I never even became a youth director at the conference. From the district, I went to the union. So young people became, I was interested in them, even as a pastor. And I tried that even in my preaching, whatever I did, because I used to conduct even special seminars for young people in my local church. So I've always had interest in them, but I never saw myself as someone who could, just specialize in leading young people. But God had his own plan. So I don't know whether I'm answering your question correctly.
No. So you served as a union. You jumped from the local church
to the
union.
Yeah.
That's a huge shift.
It is a huge shift.
So what made you realize that this was your call? Because you could have stayed at a local church level.
Sure. Well, the union president at the time was persuasive.
Was who?
Persuasive. He persuaded me.
Okay.
He said to me, you need to be a youth director, because he was calling me after the nominating committee had just elected me or nominated me to be a youth director for the union. So he actually persuaded me to become a youth director. He tried to convince me. He said, you know what, we are looking for you specifically. I don't know what they saw, but and we prayed about it, of course, and I spoke to family members and they encouraged me to accept the call. So that's how I accepted the call. But I never thought that I really qualified, because I thought that others who were more qualified than myself would be the ones suitable to do that.
What would you say was your vision when you took this role? What became your vision for how you wanted to be a youth director?
My vision when I started at the union was that I need to learn as much as possible from those who were experienced. So I used to consult with my predecessors. And also, I made sure that, we go back to the basics. I didn't want to complicate things. And I used to say to the conference directors that I worked with, I said, listen, let's not complicate this thing. It's very simple. I wanted to share with the young people what I learned and what I benefited from when I was young. And I felt that if I give them something else, it would be shortchanging them. So that was my premise. I don't want to complicate the work. I want to make things simple, transmit to the young people, share with the young people what made me who I am. And I remember what we were taught as young people, and that's what guided me during those years when I was youth director at the union.
So how many years did you serve at the union level?
I served at the union level for 7 years.
All right, for 7 years.
Yeah.
And then you are called to
the division.
SID.
Yeah, SID,
right?
Southern Africa Indian Ocean Division.
So now this becomes a lot. This is different. I mean, now you're not just in South Africa, which is where you've spent much of your life. Now you're going to be flying to different countries and trying to help guide their young people and help their leaders to understand this vision. Does this change how you start to solidify like your thoughts and stuff? Or do you kind of change the direction your vision goes with young people? Or does this really just it's got to be simple and it just kind of stays at that basic premise?
My premise, Alisa, was that I need to be consistent. You cannot change a winning formula, I felt that, what God had, blessed me with when I was serving as Union Youth Director, I need to continue with that. But of course, at a much more, bigger scale than what I was doing at the Union. And I was able to work, to canvass the support of the conference, or rather the Union directors, share with them my vision, what I would like to see happening at the division, and fortunately I got the support. So I pretty much carried on with what I started at the Union, and that is to make sure that our young people, have a connection with Jesus, and they are disciples of Jesus, and they participate in the mission of the church. And I made sure that we have progressive classes happening in the different conferences and the unions of the division, because as you know, progressive classes, the Pathfinder Club, Adventurer Club, all those classes have contributed and still contribute to making our young people, spiritually strong, because through those classes they get the skills, the training, and everything. So it was a continuation of that, but with different nuances.
So Busi, you've lived in Africa. Is it all your life?
All my life.
Okay. You because even the division headquarters are there.
In Pretoria,
your union
yes.
headquarters are there. So you've lived there all your life.
Sure.
And now that you're at the division level, obviously, you've traveled to, some different countries and stuff in your capacity as youth director. So the General Conference session of 2022, 2023. Yeah, I have to remember what year it is. It's 22. Yes. Okay. So it happens, and Gary Blanchard has been serving.
Sure.
And he has announced that he's stepping down. He's taking a call to be a conference president. Did you envision that this call was going to come to you?
No, not at all.
Tell me about the call. When you hear your name and someone comes and must talk to you about this, tell me what's going on in Busi's head at this time.
I was a member of the nominating committee at the General Conference session. And it was my first time to become a nominating committee member. So I accepted to become a nominating committee member because the SID asked me with others to represent them in the nominating committee of the GC. So for me, it was going to be a learning experience, and looked forward to it. Okay. So I sat in the nominating committee, other nominations happened, and then when the youth director was going to be nominated, Elder Wilson stood there and mentioned that they would like me to be the youth director of the GC. I was stunned because
you had no idea.
I had no idea. No one spoke to me about it. No one I'm honest when I say no one hinted to me prior to GC session to say.
How did you feel when you heard that?
I don't even know how to describe my feelings because it was a shock, a serious shock. I was sitting in front, the front row. I was sitting in the front row, and I was sitting with some of the colleagues from SID. They then described to me how I looked like.
I want to hear this description. Give me the description.
So this one president, because I was sitting with two presidents, the one president says, when your name was called, we looked at you and we could tell that you are confused. You don't know what's happening. You are shocked, confused, and you don't know. You are in a state of daze, It's like you're dreaming. And I said, that's exactly how I felt, because I did not know that this was going to happen. And when your name is mentioned and now there's going to be a discussion about the name, it's nerve-wracking.
You step out, though, while they're discussing. Yeah, I don't think I'd want to hear people discussing. I think that would be very nerve-wracking. No, but so you step out, and I'm going to guess you call your wife.
I stepped out. Then when I stepped out, I called my wife, and I said, listen, this just happened. She was in the hotel room at the time because she had to do something. She was not on the session floor. And so she was shocked, just as much as I was shocked. And we prayed together, and I was standing there. And I stood there for almost an hour. Now, I had been sitting in the nominating committee, and I observed how some of the people who were nominated, they would step out, but they never stood outside as long as I did. So I could tell that the discussion is intense. But at the same time, I was praying. I said, Lord, let it be intense so that the right person should be chosen. Because really, to be honest with you, I was not ambitious about it. I did not want to do it, but I was depending on God's guidance. I said, God, if it is your will, then it's fine. So while I was standing there, I was hoping that my name does not become successful and someone else is chosen. You know, to be honest, that's how I felt, because I know that there are capable leaders around the world. The team of division directors that, you know, are available.
They're pretty amazing.
They're pretty amazing. So I knew that any one of them qualified, but I disqualified myself.
You're like, everyone's amazing, but me.
So that's how I felt. And eventually they asked me to come in. And the rest is history.
Literally at this point.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that they called you.
Thank you.
Something that I've learned about you, you seem to be someone who's always wanting to learn.
Sure.
I mean, even when you said you went into the nominating committee, you said, and I get to learn, you know, I was going to learn. You seem like this person who's this perpetual student.
Yeah.
You always want to learn. You want to, but you also want to mentor and share. But you want it to be simple.
Sure.
You're not complicating things. You want to bring people back to the basics. Yeah. And I appreciate that, because I think that's actually what our young people need today. They don't need another program. They don't need, they need simple, authentic faith reinforced. So I'm grateful that God has selected you for this time. I do not doubt that he has called you. And I know, you know, because you're kind of coming in at this like weird, it was like a weird GC session year, because it's really only just like a 2.5, 3 year term kind of a thing.
Sure.
I look forward to seeing how you shift and how you take all those experiences that God has gifted you with, and how you help the World Church family. Whether somebody in China or somebody in Michigan or somebody in South America or wherever it may be, that all those experiences that God has gifted you with, why he picked you for this time in our church's history to serve. I don't believe it's by accident. And I look forward to seeing how you sense the Spirit in your life, and you're able to share that vision with the world. So thank you for saying yes. And I'm glad that you realized that you were just as capable. Although some days I'm guessing you still don't think you are just as capable, but that's many of us.
But I've seen glimpses of God's guidance, you know, even though I wasn't sure, but I've seen him assure me that he will be with me, and I need your prayers.
Absolutely. And I'm going to tell you, as someone who struggles with imposter syndrome myself, you have been called for a reason.
Thank
and
you.
Never to doubt that, because often those who are the ones who question it, sometimes the most, they are really the perfect person for the job, because they know they need the power of the Holy Spirit in their lives. So thank you for allowing him to work in yours.
Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of A&M Profile with our guest, Busi Khumalo. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast, our YouTube channel, wherever it is you're turning in today, so you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you for spending this time with us, and join us next week as I continue to get to know the life stories of more inspiring people.